Hi, we're Tony and Chelsea Northrup, and we're in the car today to head out and compare the Nikon D610 versus the Nikon D810. The battle of the big full-frame cameras. This Asylum here will be a perfect subject to test the detail that each camera can show. Find out if the 36 megapixels on the D810 actually shows more than the 24 megapixels on the D610. I'm going to shoot at f8 just to make sure I capture as much detail as possible. I'm shooting at both 64 and ISO 100 on the D810 just because it can. Now I'll switch over to the D610. Okay. First, let's check out the detail provided by both of the cameras. We'll zoom into 4:1 just so you can see all the details. So this is getting it really tight. Now right away, if you look at these shingles, you can see substantially more detail in the D810, no doubt, but the D610 is just fine. And even though there's 50% more resolution, I think the actual real detail that you get is probably like 20% more with this particular Tamron lens, which is known to be one of the sharpest lenses. Let's go ahead and see if we can peer into these windows and examine some of the shadow detail. So I'm gonna unlock this just to line the two images up a little bit more. And now let's crank up the shadows a few stops. So we can see both pull out about the same level of detail in that window. Let's move over to a shadow area and see how much we can see. So under here was almost invisible in the initial picture, and we can see a lot more detail from the D810, but also more noise. And if you look at this private property sign here, you can see it's a lot closer to being legible on the D810 than the D610. So those extra pixels are giving us some benefit. You're not going to see it unless you make a huge print though. The shadow detail seems to be about the same. If anything, it might actually be more pleasant on the D610, because you can see some just kind of random spots that came out of nowhere here on the D810, and clearly those don't exist. Another point I want to bring up is the moire. If you look at the bricks here in the shadow detail and these vertical lines, you can see all these weird and unnatural colors, like all these greens and yellows, and they're not nearly as bad on the D810. So even though the D610 has that anti-aliasing filter, the D810 actually seems to do a much better job with those colors. Now let's get out of here and we'll wait until the sun goes down and see how they handle night photography. I took both cameras out to get some pictures of the stars, and I couldn't see any difference. The D810's extra resolution was lost in the atmosphere, but the D810 was easier to focus using live view because I could hit that OK button and the screen just got brighter. The D610 was bright enough to be able to focus on the brightest of stars though. It's quality stuff, Chelsea.
Tony, come back. For our next test, we'll be testing each camera's autofocusing systems to see which one will hold up when shooting wildlife or sports. We're going to use our good friend, Danny DeVito, to help us take pictures.
Testing both the D610 and the D810 with the Nikon 24-70 at 70 millimeters, 1/1000th f2.8. So why am I only getting some percentage of pictures when you get 100% with your camera? Because we're stressing the cameras and we're being very, very picky. We're not allowing depth of field to give us any sort of margin of error, so we're checking the pictures very carefully to really try out it. And which modes are we using? All of them. We're going to systematically use all the modes and then only take the mode that worked the best in this particular scenario. Go for it, Danny. Danny DeVito's role?
Yeah.
I don't know. Taxi? That's the first one that comes to mind.
Taxi?
All right, I'll switch some cameras. Well, what else has he been in? I mean, there's Always Sunny.
Batman, Twins, Matilda.
I do remember him from Matilda.
He was the penguin.
That was a terrible movie, though.
Yeah, but he was wonderful. He's wonderful in everything he does.
Kind of sounds like you got a thing for Danny DeVito. So we have fast cards in both cameras. The D610 has an SD card, so that's all it takes. It's getting 13, 14 raw shots before the buffer fills and it slows down. The D810 has a slower shooting rate, 5 frames a second instead of 6 frames a second, but it's shooting like 22 frames before the buffer fills up. So you get a few more shots with the D810. When using the center focus points, the D610 got about 74% in focus, the D810 got about 82%. So they both did well. The D810 did a little bit better. Switching to the edge focus points made a bigger difference. The D810 got about 80% sharp, losing almost no focusing capability. The D610 dropped to 68%. So the outside focusing points on the D610, not quite as capable, limiting your composition choices when doing sports and wildlife. But let's talk about sharp frames per second, because when you're shooting full frame, the D610 shoots 6 frames a second, the D810 only 5 frames a second because the pictures are higher resolution. So the D610 got 4.4 full frame shots sharp per second. The D810 only got 4.1 full frame shots sharp per second. The D810 shoots at a higher frame rate when you drop it into DX mode though, so it has either a 1.2 or 1.5x crop. So you're losing all that extra detail that it gives you over the D610, but you're getting more sharp frames per second. The D610 in DX mode still gives you about 4.4 sharp frames a second. The D810 jumps up to 4.9. And if you put on the extra battery pack in the D810, you can bump it up to 7 frames a second, giving you 5.7 sharp frames a second. So full frame shots, the D610, using the center focusing point, actually does a little bit better than the D810, but the D810 is definitely better overall, especially if you can use the higher frame rates by dropping into DX mode.
So in this next test, I'll be putting the D810 up against the D610 to see how much moire there is. The D610 has the AA filter, which reduces sharpness, but also reduces moire, and the D810, though more sharp, will probably produce more moire. So let's see. Take 3 steps.
We couldn't see any substantial difference between the D610 and the D810.
I didn't get a shot that often. Okay, there you go. So we'll have to take these in. What'd you say?
Ah, you're too fast, Sandy. Chels, which is better, D610 or D810?
Well, I think technically the D810 is better. It's got more
It's better.
megapixels. It's got 36.2 instead of 24.2.
Yeah.
It's got a higher resolution LCD screen. It's got twice the frames per second for video. And most importantly, I think it has 12 more focusing points. So those extra focusing points for us meant that we were focusing a bit faster and also focusing easier on moving subjects.
Yeah, and you notice it even with just portrait work. Even if
Yeah.
your subject is mostly still, it just snaps into focus a little better. You don't have to use focus recompose as frequently because they're more spread out. The D810 is just better.
But, this is a big but, is it right for you? It's got to be right for the person, because the D810 is about $1,500 more than the D610, and the image quality, you don't see that much more of a difference. You could do a lot with that $1,500 to get better pictures.
Yeah, so I brought down an Alien Bees light here and this cool full color remote control, and you could get 4 Alien Bees lights. 4 of them, a whole studio, and control it remotely from your
The Cyber
D610.
Commander. I love the Cyber Commander.
And what do you think takes better pictures, a D610 with an entire studio or a D810 and just a lens?
Hopefully, if you have an entire studio.
That is something people will notice, controlling light.
Yeah.
They will see that. The extra pixels, they probably won't notice. If you could also get more lenses. You can
could get a better lens.
Tamron 70-200 f2.8, which we reviewed and loved. You could get the Tamron 150-600 for sports and wildlife with that extra money.
Yeah.
If you're a landscape photographer, you could put yourself on an airplane and get to Montana or the Grand Canyon. And the D610,
Depending on where you live.
yeah, well, you could, wherever you live,
can
you could
get
get
somewhere
someplace beautiful for $1,500. And the D610 at Glacier Park is going to take better pictures than the D810 at that park down the street. There might be better ways to spend your money than spending it all on the body.
Right.
And if you want information, detailed recommendations about studio lighting, lenses and such, check out my photography buying guide. Paperback, less than $20. Ebook, $9.99. Check in the links of the description for that. And you can also check out our Lightroom book and stunning digital photography.
There's also another option,
Yes.
somewhere in between the D810 and the D610.
Right, the D750 was
Right.
announced while we were doing this review. And we hardly need to touch it because it's got the focusing system of the D810 and the sensor of the D610. It's $2,200, $2,300. So it's $500 more than the D610, and it gets all the focusing benefits of the D810 with the lower resolution sensor, and it adds a tilting screen.
You love tilty screens.
I do. It's really hard to tell you to buy the D610 when the D750 is only $500 more, and you get that awesome focusing system.
And you still have that extra $1,000 left over to get some alien bees.
Yeah, you can still get a couple of lights.
You could.
All right, so I think for portraits, I'm going to push most people to the D610, so you could spend that extra money on lights.
And I'd say 70 to 200.
Right, yeah. And for sports and wildlife, I'll probably push you to the D750 because it's got that awesome focusing system at a little bit lower cost. Yeah. But if you got the budget, the ultimate camera here, the D810, for just about anything, it gets the job done. Still, I think if I had one camera I could pick in the entire world, it'd be that D810. Awesome camera. Thanks, guys. Don't forget to subscribe and share. See you later.